something I hear a lot of people talk about is this idea that they are in their heads a lot, that there's this constant, incessant thinking, this voice in their head, these constant thoughts, and it can get really exhausting to be living with. A lot of people get depression and anxiety when it's going on all the time, and they're trying to find ways to escape their head, escape their thoughts, escape their mind, to leave it. And so sometimes people will do this by using substances to get out of their head, or they'll go on their phone, or they'll go onto different addictive kind of behaviors just to get out of their head. So I want to give a few other options for this. But first, what we need to understand is a lot of what this idea of being in our head, in that incessant thinking and that chatter, what that's related to is something called the default mode network, which is something that happens. It's a bunch of different brain areas that are really, really correlated in activity. And it happens basically when our brain is on idle, meaning when it's not engaged in task positive activity. So when it's not doing something in particular, it goes into this. And some research says it's around 60 to 80%. It consumes around 60 to 80% of the brain's energy. So I'm not going to go into the specific areas of this. I get hesitant about that because I think that our understanding of the brain is still very naive. We're still in the beginning phases of that, so I think that's going to get updated a lot. So I'm going to talk about it more in the sense of the me network. So they're related. This me network has to do with self-referencing, has to do with what my reflections of my own thoughts and feelings are, trying to empathize and figure out what another person is thinking, a narrative about my past, how everything connects, things about my future, kind of analyzing myself, things like that. So that might sound familiar in terms of the chatter that's going on all the time. It's very much about me. How does this relate to me? How is this going to get my goal? How is this person relating to me? What do they think of me? So it's me. And it's all the circuits that are firing related to that are going nonstop. So one way to help us get out of this me network is to actually come, rather than trying to leave our senses and leave our head, is actually to come back into our senses, come back into our body. And I'm going to give a few ideas of how to do this. So the first is something I call conditional self-regulation. So this is the idea that we are going to just, on our own, so the co-regulation is when we use relationships for this. The first two have to do with just stuff we can do on our own. And we need to have this. We need to have self-regulating abilities because we cannot always count on other humans to behave in the perfect way that will help us soothe and feel better about ourselves. So we have to have a balance of being able to use relationships, but also being able to do stuff on our own that makes us feel better. And better is always contextual. So if I'm very, very bored, I might want to be more stimulated. If I'm overstimulated, I might want to calm down. So better is always relative. It's not always the exact same state that we're looking for. We're looking for relief, and we're looking to feel better with everything we do. So one of the ways we can do this is through this idea of conditional self-regulation, which I could also call bottom-up self-regulation. And that is using our senses interacting with our environment in some way. So whether we go out and walk in nature, or we take a bath, or we do something with aromatherapy, or pet an animal, things like that. Those are things where we are engaging our senses. And when we do that, we are drawing the neural circuitry to pay attention to other areas of the brain that is not the me network. We're bringing ourselves back into our senses and interacting with our outside environment. So that's one way to do that. The second is unconditional self-regulation, or I'll call top-down self-regulation, which is where we are actually, instead of engaging our senses with the outside world, we're gonna have moments of stillness. So this one has a little bit more movement in it. This one is more about stillness, where we go within and we withdraw from the external world, and we have a way of kind of paying attention just to what's going on inside of us, but not through that narrative me kind of network. So we can start that with using our senses, where we're sitting feels, the temperature of the air, things like that. And there's a few different varieties of what we can do here. This is a lot of what we're talking about when we're doing mindfulness and meditation. So there's a focused awareness type of meditation where you're trying to focus on a particular kind of state, or even possibly a mantra or a visual object even, or something like that, where you're trying to train your brain to not go this way all over the place, all chatter everywhere. You're trying to get it to almost work as a muscle to let you have a bit more control over what you do with your brain. The second is more of an open monitoring, a kind of just a non-judgmental noticing, and that's letting thoughts drift and sensations drift and just letting them pass by. And that also carries you away from being in this story and how this all connects and what does this mean, and emotional meaning and judgment and kind of judgment and assessment and evaluation about everything. It's just a non-judgmental noticing. So that's another kind of meditation. And then another kind is visualization. So actually having a state that you would like to feel and feeling yourself, have a feelingization or a visualization about that state that you'd like to experience. So those are some ideas of unconditional, where you're just using your mind to get into a state that you prefer. The next section is co-regulation. So this is where we're actually going to use relationships in order to get into a preferred state. So conditional co-regulation is using the actual physical presence of a person. I prefer in the flesh relationships and for that, but obviously we can't always do that. So if it needs to be online, that can be that too. And that's, the person's voice, the frequency of their voice. Doing joint movement, anything where you do something together, actually can help create coherent brain waves, which can help regulate. Eating together, talking together, walking together, anything where you're just in the presence of someone who makes you feel comfortable. We do need to pay attention to this one, because sometimes we tend to be drawn to talking about our problems or trying to feel better with people who don't necessarily always make us feel better. They make us feel more worried about the world or more fearful. So we need to also just think a little bit about that and who we tend to always go to help us regulate. We might want to add some diversity to that, so that we can see that, I kind of like how I experience myself with this person versus this person. So that's conditional co-regulation. Unconditional co-regulation is where you're not going to be in the physical presence of another person, but you're going to draw them up in your mind. And this can be a type of gratitude type of thinking of that relationship bringing you a sense of gratitude, even forgiveness or healing kinds of visualizations about our relationship in particular. So that's using our mind once again to bring us into a preferred state. And that can also help us in relationships, because as we bring them up in our mind and create these kind of preferred states, it can help us guide our behavior when we're in that relationship. And then lastly is this idea of super regulation. So that's something I have a little mini book on my website that you can get for free. And I'm actually doing a masterclass on this on June 27th, and there will be replays of that available. So super regulation is where you're actually going to transcend the self. You're thinking about something bigger than you. So you are someone who has some awareness of your abilities to self-regulate in different ways, of using relationships, this idea of co-regulation, in different ways to have a preferred state. But you're doing it for a bigger purpose. You're doing it to help others learn how to empower themselves to self-regulate and co-regulate. And another feature of a super regulator is that they're not necessarily trying to help people avoid pain, avoid discomfort, and just treat the symptoms all the time. They're looking at the deeper systems, the deeper belief structures that are in place. Where did those come from in the first place? What are the environments and the values and the lifestyles that we have that are leading people to be so dysregulated and not wanting to be in the present moment? So a super regulator is also someone who's questioning some of those things and trying to help figure out, how do we evolve some of the systems and structures and paradigms and mindsets that we're in. So even, for example, helping people get more in touch with their sense of purpose, what they are here to contribute to the world, what they're here to bring, a sense of meaning, bringing meaning even to their pain and suffering and discomfort, and allowing those to be signs and signals that we can listen to when people are in pain, when things are happening, rather than just trying to shut them down through different means. That we actually try to listen to what those things are telling us. So that's part of what a super regulator does. So those are some ideas of how we can get out of our head. And I just want to do an interpretation or an imitation of what it looks like to be in the me network versus coming back into our senses. For example, if we are in a conversation, or let's say we're even walking down the street, the me network will be like, me, how, what's happening with me? What's my life about? What is this, constant thinking. And then all of a sudden there'll be a small little moment where you're like, oh wow, look at that sun. Look how beautiful the sky is. Me. Oh, look, there's the traffic light. I gotta go. Me. So you can almost see when you can see a person in the me network and then coming back. They're in the me network and they're coming back. You see it a lot if you start to pay attention to where people are. They're not here and then they're here. They're not here and then they're here. That's really this idea of this default mode network, the me network. We need to kind of have something to draw us back into the present moment. And that's what I think some of these techniques can help us do. They can help prepare that brain activity and work out those brain circuits to help us do that. So if you're interested in hearing more, I'm going to go into the actual sensory motor science and the neurobiology of these in my masterclass on June 27th. And if you miss it, I'll have replays for it. So that's going to be available on my website, stephaniefay.com. And there's also the mini book that you can get for free. So you can go there to check it out. So I hope that was helpful, and leave some comments and let me know what you think and if you have any other questions.